It is Connect Radio, and that is Alex Clare with Too Close. Now, if I was to say to you, the Christian Ambulance Association, what would you think? Maybe you'd think absolutely nothing because you haven't heard of them before, which is no surprising because they've only been going for 5 years. And in the grand scale of things, if you look at other workplaces and other organisations, they've been having these sort of associations for many, many years. So joining us now, because we need to tell you about this, we need to find out more, is Simon. Good morning to you, Simon.
Morning.
Now, just tell us how this all started, because you personally, you've been working for the ambulance service for over 30 years.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. So it's just one of those things really where myself and a few colleagues in one corner of the ambulance service in the country, who are all Christians, were just bouncing around and saying, how do we get better support for Christians in this it's pretty tough environment? We see it in place in other, like in hospitals and in the police, but we've never come across anything in the ambulance service. And it's really about how do we support one another to live out our faith on what someone described recently as the front line of the front line. It's a pretty harsh environment often, but a great opportunity to witness and live out your faith, but also a pretty unique set of challenges at the same time.
Now, it's no coincidence, because we knew you were coming on, that we were looking at the most dangerous jobs in the UK. And I don't know if you've been listening or not, but at number one, it was a paramedic. The most dangerous job in the UK is a paramedic. Now, you've been working on the front line. Why would it be such a dangerous job?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that question. That is really interesting. I've not come across that. I think for starters, mentally and emotionally, it is incredibly taxing for people. So look, Gareth, it's a really interesting one. We've talked about this now end of time amongst ourselves over the last 5 years. I think about it a bit like this. If the kind of places that Jesus placed himself when he was here, amongst the most neglected communities, the people that are isolated in deprivation, that's where we put our paramedics and our other ambulance staff, alongside fire and police colleagues and others, but often in really difficult testing, volatile, unpredictable environments. And so what tends to happen when you drop yourself into someone's own personal emergency in circumstances they're already really struggling with, and where they've got some really clear and often urgent expectations of you, you're creating a really heady mix where people are potentially pointing the finger at you, looking for you to solve a lot of their immediate identified problems. And it can become very, very difficult. You all have seen, and your listeners will have seen, examples of where ambulance staff have been assaulted in the course of their work, which obviously is a big problem for us. But when I was at a thing called the Emergency Services Show that happens at the NEC once a year, back in last September, and chatting to some colleagues from an organisation called PTSD 999, and they were saying that ambulance staff are by far the biggest risk in terms of emergency world, in terms of PTSD. Mental health is a huge, huge problem and a big risk for people involved in the work.
Do you know, just in case you missed the list, so you've got a number 10. It starts with door staff, then a farmer, a taxi driver, a roofer, a prison officer, a nurse, a deckhand, working on an oil rig, on an oil platform, those sort of workers. At number 2, a firefighter, and then at number 1, a paramedic. And you know something? And I'll share a bit of my own journey here, because my daughter had a fit, and this was 2 years ago, and it was during lockdown. And it was when, you know, we weren't allowed to see people, and it was such a difficult situation anyway, because, you know, there was nobody there to help at the time. And genuinely, I can't express how grateful I was to the paramedics and the professionalism that they showed, because it was mid-pandemic, and they came in with their masks and everything on, and I broke down. I was in absolute tears, and this paramedic gave me a hug. And you know something? It was one of the most memorable hugs I've ever had in my life, because the professionalism that they showed, and they just said, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. And to be honest, even thinking about it now, I am tearing up a bit, because they just put your mind at rest. They put your heart at ease. And to see the ambulance arrive and to know that my daughter, who was in this awful state, she was in safe hands. And I can't believe the mentality that would attack a paramedic or any other emergency service when their sole purpose is to come and help people who are in need. And I genuinely think that when somebody does that, they should be put in jail. I think that there should be no sort of, no messing around. There should be no, we'll, tell them off a little bit. They should be put in jail for a long time because there's no need for that sort of stuff. Now, you must have seen so many things in your career. And I want to ask about how your faith and the trauma go hand in hand. Because, for example, and you don't have to share this, of course you don't, but if you see some absolute devastating accident happen where there's people who have died, there's people who are dying when you arrive, how do you go home and just deal with that? How do you sort of put it in some order in your mind?
Wow, some really good questions there, Gareth, and a number of them. Just to pick up the first thing you were saying about can't understand how ambulance and emergency people get attacked. I've got a lot of sympathy for that, and a lot of my most kind of base instincts are for protection from my colleagues and my people at work and for other members of the CAA. And it does create quite a visceral response. I mean, how could you do that to people? The overlap into my Christian faith and those of others is also, well, how do we put ourselves into that place where those people are when they are reacting that way? Well, some of them, their violent or inappropriate responses fueled by the circumstances. Not uncommonly, it's fueled by drugs and alcohol, which is clearly really, really difficult. But a lot of them, of course, are already in the context of having an incredibly difficult life circumstance. Now, that is not to excuse the behaviour. We're all responsible for our own behaviour. And of course, one of the things that we find in the Bible, I think uniquely, is 100% justice and 100% mercy all at the same time. And people are required to pay for that kind of behaviour. And in order to support people in those kind of very vulnerable jobs, that is necessary. We should do that. As Christians, of course, there's another whole dimension to this about our mercy, the mercy that we've experienced from Jesus when we made such a mess of our lives. Then, of course, it's obligated on us to pass that same perspective on to everybody that we're meeting. That's not always easy in the heat of the moment, and we get it wrong sometimes as well, like everybody else. But in terms of how it works with our faith, I've had that conversation with a number of people over the years, and they say to me, people I work with, they say, how do you reconcile some of the stuff that we see with a faith? Because to the world, it feels like it's all just meaningless, doesn't it? It feels like it's just acts of brokenness in a messed up world, which gives you a great opportunity to say to people what actually you're thinking inside is, yeah, it is messed up. It is broken. There is a lot of suffering. It was never meant to be this way. But the great gospel message is it's actually all sorted. It may not look like it right now, but it's all done, that Jesus has fixed all this on the cross, and we're working in that context. So does that help you every moment during the day? Well, I hope as we grow as Christians during our life, increasingly it does. But the reality is that Christians like me and colleagues, they need someone to put their arm around and go, yeah, that was difficult, wasn't it? Maybe you did mess up on that time. Maybe your witness wasn't what it should have been. Hey, look, we're all broken and we're all having the corners knocked off us as we go through this day to day. And this is a pretty difficult refining fire sometimes. But actually, the foundation and the meaning that faith in Jesus gives, life doesn't make sense without God. It is just all broken, meaningless. We are just a bag of almost worthless chemicals, if you want to reduce us down to that, without the spiritual aspect of life and a God who's in control now and for all eternity. It doesn't make any sense. I've had a few situations in my life. Many years ago, I've been in nearly 30 years now, and I don't want to take too much credit for what I do day to day. I'm actually doing a management job, really important, but it's not the same as working front line for 30 years face to face with people's emergencies. But many years ago, I went out to the cardiac arrest of my own granddad. It's like absolutely devastating. What do you do with that? And
And can I just ask there and pick up on that? So you would have presumably got the call on the radio,
yeah,
and they would have, did he tell you the name of the person and the address? And just explain to us, when you heard your own grandfather's name and the address that you obviously recognized, what went through your mind?
yeah. So the way things work now is that we don't tend to use names, we tend to use addresses. It was in the middle of the night, so I was a little bit, it wasn't as busy then as it is now. So I was a little bit stuporous, but there's no opportunity to be stuporous these days because there's always a stack of calls waiting for you. But I can remember I was staggering out to the ambulance and thinking, this is my granddad's address. This is all a bit strange. What's going on here? Because he was elderly. I think he was in his 70s, but he wasn't known to be, he wasn't unwell at the time. And I can distinctly remember turning up and discovering that he was in cardiac arrest. And we train our people to so that when they get into a time critical environment, they just respond. They use their training, and you almost go into autopilot mode, especially with something like that. So you're going through the motions. But my colleagues around me were fantastic. My managers were amazing. The people at hospital when we got there were awesome. But yeah, a really odd environment. But it's helped me with my framework. It's helped me to understand not only in the context of my relationship with God, but in the context of other people at work and what they're going with when they go to people they know.
Because my wife's a midwife, and they have, I guess, rules, or they have advisory things where they'd say, if a person comes in and they're about to drop, you would usually say, actually, this is my next door neighbour. It's probably not best that I deal with them, and that's fine. But in your game, you probably haven't got that choice, have you? So when that call came in, you couldn't have said, actually, sorry, I can't go because I think he's my granddad. And presumably you wouldn't want to not go.
No, exactly. And I've been out to lots of people over the years that I do know and often didn't know it was them before I got there. And there's great benefit to everybody in someone being there that they do know. And some of this stuff, the psychological element of physical symptoms is phenomenal, something I don't completely understand. But I've seen people improve dramatically just when they see someone they know walk in the door and give the impression that it's all going to be all right. And the vast majority of things we go out to aren't cardiac arrests. They're things that have a much better outcome and are nowhere near as time critical or as serious. And being there and being able to give someone assurance that they're getting both the physical treatment they need and the emotional, and sometimes this is difficult, but spiritual support they need. It is people who explain to me that made a huge difference to them in the midst of their own emergency.
And where are you allowed to share your faith? So we've got our very own resident GP, Dr. Ken, and he says that he can't openly just say to a patient in his surgery, I'll pray for you. But if they ask him for prayer, or if maybe, and I hope I'm right in saying this, but if they say that they're a Christian to him and they're open about it, you are allowed to pray. I think that's the case. I just need to put that out there, that I think that's what Dr. Ken's told us. And that's the same sort of with my wife as well. But for you, how does it work for you? Because you arrive at this emergency and it's all hands on deck, if we use that phrase. There's no rules against you praying in your own mind. There's no rules. Nobody can stop you praying under your breath. But are you ever allowed to, if you go to an emergency and you see that somebody's been involved in this major car crash and almost they've got, say, for example, this cross around their neck, what do you do in that situation?
Well, really good question. So it's very similar. First of all, it's worth bearing in mind that the vast majority of what we go to isn't as time critical as you've just described. There is some of it, but the 90% of what we go to, there is time to make an assessment and have a conversation with the person and work out what your plan is going to be. I would always encourage people to pray to God yourself. This is about your relationship with God primarily. You're the believer here. Of course, if you start having a conversation about spiritual things with someone who's actually called you because they have a perceived physical need, that's potentially going to cause a big problem. You've got an issue potentially of them complaining because you were praying with them rather than sorting out their chest pains, which is not a good look from their perspective. And you've also potentially got a bit of a witness problem, really, bizarrely, because we might think that actually that's the best possible thing we could be doing for them. But from their perspective, they're thinking, well, this Christian bloke turned up. I didn't know he was coming, but actually, rather than doing what I needed, he's praying for me. So I would always say to people that this is a fantastic opportunity to serve God on the front line. It's a great opportunity to bring together your faith and a very practical outwork in ministry. But you do need to be really wise about how and when you openly engage people about your faith. And that goes for your colleagues as well. That's a big part of the NHS. We are very much in a multicultural, multi-faith environment. And my message to my colleagues is, if you want to buy the right to be respected, valued, and encouraged as a believer, then you need to encourage other people to have the same opportunities.
And just before we move on to the actual Christian Ambulance Association, because we want people to get behind it, we want people to support it and to know how we can be praying for it. Have you had any miracles happen whilst you've been praying at any of these emergencies where you know it, maybe they don't know it, but you know it, and you think, well, actually, I was praying, you know, in private for this person and something incredible has happened?
I can't think of anything specifically, Gareth. I have been praying for people. I've been in those situations, but perhaps it's an indication of where my faith is at. I don't know. But generally speaking, those people who are the most time critical, you are 100% in the moment trying to do the practical stuff that needs to be done. There will be occasions where those things have happened, but I'm struggling to put my finger on something.
You know, I don't think it is sort of a level of faith that only people can see miracles and do miracles, because I think you are doing miracles every day. You and the team at the NHS, you know, you're doing God's work all the time, and the love that you show to people, and again, the professionalism that you do, because there will be things that you arrive at and you're like thinking, actually, we need to be really quick here. We've never seen this before. But you never see paramedics arrive. It's going, what do we do? What do we do? Quick. It's always such professionalism. So just tell us about this Christian Ambulance Association, because we want to know about how we can support you, about how we can find out more about what you do. Those who work in the ambulance service, how do they join? Tell us, Simon.
Okay, so first thing, we're not exclusive to the NHS. Quite a lot of our members are actually in private sector. A lot of your listeners may not know that there's a significant amount of private ambulance services out there. Really, really good people, and lots of options, particularly for paramedics who are registered healthcare professionals. They can work for the NHS, which is where most of us are, but there's still a significant minority of people working in the private sector. And actually, quite a lot of the work of the private sector ambulance services is working for the NHS. So we do work very closely. In terms of what we're trying to achieve, then we are not primarily an evangelistic organisation for some of the reasons that we've already described. But we absolutely accept and welcome the Great Commission to communicate God's love to everybody around us. Primarily, our reason for being is to support Christians working in the ambulance service and the associated areas, and to give them encouragement and confidence to bring their Christian self to work and be who they are, in the hope that they will encourage one another through networks locally, and also that will create respect and with their colleagues, opportunities to support, encourage, pray for, maybe build relationships with their colleagues, but also at appropriate times the opportunity to share their faith with their colleagues. In terms of what people can pray for, because I think you asked me that as well. You did.
Yeah.
So I would say, first and foremost, please pray for people generally who work in on the most front line. There's not a hierarchy out there, but we're talking, aren't we, about people who work in the fire, the police, the ambulance, hospitals, all those associated environments where they're doing some work, but the vast majority of people just wouldn't want to do. They're glad someone else is doing it. That necessarily means they need some prayer. They need people around them, whether they're Christians or not. If they're not Christians, then we're praying for common grace for these guys, aren't we? That they'll know God's blessing in what they're doing. But we're also praying for God's special grace, aren't we? We want these guys to know the big deal, the salvation, the faith, the rescue that's being offered to them. And if we can be part of that, then that would be fantastic. More practically, lots of your listeners are probably members of churches. There'll be people in the ambulance service, in the CAA, in other registered services. Ask them, talk to them. You might have assumptions about what they do. You might well be surprised about what day-to-day life is like. Pray for them. If you're in a position of church leadership, get them up the front of the church. Tell us what it's like. How can we pray for you? What is going on in your world? Some of the things that go on the ambulance service that a lot of people just wouldn't dream of. The healthcare, the acute healthcare system is really struggling with capacity at the moment. That means every time we take someone to hospital, in a lot of cases, we can be queuing up outside hospital for an hour, 2 hours, more than that sometimes. That's really, really difficult when you've got someone who's really unwell in your care, and you can't move them into definitive care in the hospital. Just some of those things that people won't understand. So praying for them. And then I suppose practically as well, just about how can you get alongside those people? You know, what can you do? You can go and have a look on our website, which is caauk.org. I've had a few emails from people trying to get hold of the Civil Aviation Authority, which I always find amusing. But that's the problem when you give yourself a name, some initials that's similar to some that's what's so widely recognised. Have a look on our website. There's some things there that you can be praying for. But especially, I would say, it's about relationships. It's about supporting people, encouragement. Find out who the people are where you are in your church, your neighbourhood. And, you know, don't be too intrusive, because they've got private lives as well, and they may not want to talk about it. But if they want to, and as opportunity arises, pray for them, get alongside them, see what they need.
Simon, it's been an absolute joy speaking to you. Thank you for sharing. And Simon is from the Christian Ambulance Association. If you have a look, they're on all the socials. And just thank you from us all here, from the whole of the UK, in fact, and further afield, for everything you did during that dreadful 2 years and everything that you continue to do. We really are blessed to have people like you.
Thanks, Gareth. It's been a pleasure.